Hey everybody, Princess Friend here. It's been a while since I've actually done a review, so only except for the This Is America that I just did, but I'm gonna go ahead and do the review for the Black Album now. This has been one that's been highly anticipated by a lot of you guys, so I'm definitely excited to go ahead and bring this one to you, finally. So for a long time, I think this was one of the most sought after collector's items from Prince friends, because there were only 200,000 of them that were released in 1988. And not all of them were purchased before Prince had Warner Brothers pull them back and then replaced it with Lovesexy. Now, the story actually is that, this was an album that Prince had spent quite a while on. He took 18 months working on this album, which is actually a long time in Prince time. His original idea was to release the album in 1988 with just a black cover and not have promotion or advertising or anything. And the reason behind that was because The Sign of the Times was still actually out. It was still selling well, and the singles were still out. So, I think that this was kind of an attempt to kind of help Warner Brothers with the promotion a little bit, like, hey, Sign of the Times is still the thing, but here's, another album. It's not marked or anything. We're not going to advertise it, but, here's some music if you want it. The album itself was eventually released in 1994 officially as a part of finishing off Prince's contract that he had signed with Warner Brothers. I did a video about that contract, so I'm not going to belabor it here, but there should be a link here. It basically boiled down to we want 10 albums. Well, no. Well, then we want 6. And he said, fine, then you can just do the Black Album again. So the interesting thing about that release of the Black Album was that he said, we're going to release it in 1994, but any copies that aren't sold by the end of 1994 have to be returned to the distributors, because Prince never actually really wanted it out in the first place. So I think it's really interesting, like the whole kind of up and down with this album, and the reason that he didn't want to release this album was because he had a spiritual epiphany where he kind of realized how angry the album was, and we'll get into it in a second and you'll see kind of where it is, and it's very kind of a negative album. And he said that an artist is always remembered for the last work that they did, and he didn't want this to be the last work that he ever did, just in case something bad happened. I don't know. And I think that that's the reason why by the time that it was released in 1994, I had a weird feeling about it, and I think that that's part of why I was possibly reluctant to do this review. It feels like a step backward in his musical evolution, and we've been going from the beginning to end, and now, just the same way as I was in 1994, it just feels weird kind of hearkening back to a different sound than he has in 1994, different band and all that stuff. I mean, it's actually pretty cool. We get a bit more of the Lovesexy band, so yay, because I did love the Lovesexy band, but it just seems so off. And again, because it's kind of an angry album, it feels off from the Prince that I knew, and the Prince that got me hooked in my early teens with the uplifting and positive messages and making me want to be a better person, whereas the Black Album has none of this. So, and that's not even to say that it's a bad album. It's definitely not a bad album. It's actually really good, and it has some fun parts to it, and more Lovesexy band, so you can't really go wrong there. But let's go ahead and get into the tracks, and you can kind of get a feel for it. If you don't have it, this will be your first taste of it. So yeah, let's listen.
We're gonna do the grind, y'all. Got you where I want ya. Girl, it's gonna feel so good. So good. Up and down, on the beach, y'all. Like a pony wood. Love grind, all the boys.
So from beginning to end, Lay Grind is an easy kind of dance groove. I think I like this one so much because it's kind of like that first, track. It's more Lovesexy band, which is always good in my book. I really did like that combination of musicians. I think what it lacks is any kind of melody. It's mostly him just kind of talking over the beat in weird kind of atypical rhythmic fashion, but it makes up for that with really good energy and a lot of funkiness. Fun fact, Lay Grind was, Lay Grind and a couple of other tracks on here were recorded for a birthday party thrown for Sheila E. in 1986. And then it ended up on the album in 1988, which I find kind of interesting. But it's got some fun horns to it, and I think it starts the album off pretty good. So this is another exercise in organized chaos from the Lovesexy band. The song feels like it might just need to be just a tad faster for it to really just to really pop. But it's still good, actually. It's still a good song. Of course, the name of the song, Cindy C, and the lyrics talking about a model in France, it's obvious that this is a song about, or to, or in honor of, or inspired by, or whatever for Cindy Crawford. Digging a little deeper, I actually went and tried to check out some articles and stuff. Cindy Crawford says that she was actually just dancing at a club, and this small dude came over and danced with her, and she didn't even realize it was him until he walked away, and she was like, oh, wait a minute, is that Prince? And then like a few months later, she was told, hey, did you know Prince wrote a song about you? And she's like, what? So it's obvious that Prince was like inspired by the fact that he didn't impress her, because if you actually listen to the lyrics, it's a lot of like, hey, will you come do this with me? No. Like, hey, I'm trying to impress you. No, I'm not interested. So I think that that's pretty fun, and it lends to the energy of the song. But again, this is like Le Grind was very dancey, and then this one actually starts off that kind of like, oh, you didn't like me, kind of like slightly negative vibe to it.
Ain't all the good rappers, one that's dead. Own it. Dead. Own it. Shall we go back? Yeah. Let's go.
So Prince recorded this track alone, and it's basically his attack against the rap scene at the time in 1988, which he didn't like. And a lot of his attacks on it was that it seems very frivolous, it seems very into gold teeth and rapping about dumb things that have nothing to do with the subject matter. You're doing it just so that you can like get a good rhyme in. And like if you look at like the rappers and the artists that were out in like 1988, some of them fit the bill. I mean, so there was DJ Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince. EPMD, as much as I like them, you could tell that every so often they kind of just had a good, rhyme. They picked a word for the rhyme and not necessarily for the intent. Rob Bass, Slick Rick. There was actually quite a few. Eric B and Rakim, that's a really good one. Biz Markie, probably on Prince's down list. But there were also a lot of really good rappers out at the time, which I think was another reason why Prince really wanted to pull this back, because I think he was kind of insulting an entire genre of music for what he saw was bad in a small fraction of them. I mean, like, you also had Public Enemy and Ice-T and Dougie Fresh and Boogie Down Productions, and you had all these other really great rappers who happened to take offense when Prince said, hey, rap kind of sucks. And, and this is not something I normally talk about. My brother's actually a rapper, and I remember when I was playing this album a lot back then, because I was at home. I lived at home at that time. But I remember he would be like, man, like, is he really dissing, like, all rap? And I was like, I mean, he kind of is. It was kind of frivolous at the time, but, I mean, my brother wasn't wrong to be kind of offended by that, because it's kind of, I think it's a big contributor to why he pulled it back. But I honestly think it's a pretty funny track. But your mileage may vary.
Come bathe with me. Let's drown each other in each other's emotion. Bathe with me. Let's cover each other with perfume and lotion. Bathe with me. Ooh, let me touch your
So Until We're in Love was the only track to actually survive the transition from the Black Album to Lovesexy. I think Prince just really liked the song. I think there's a reason for that too, because it's a damn good track. But, since I already covered it, go watch the Lovesexy review to listen to my thoughts on that.
Wild, ain't that a bitch? What they do for a living? Manage rock stars. Who? Prince, ain't that a bitch? That skinny motherfucker with the high voice? Please, who do I look like, baby? Yesterday's fool. Don't you know I will kill you now?
So Bob George is a track, and it's like less a song than it is kind of an extended musical skit. Prince takes on a new character that he created, who is a man who interrogates his woman and gets mad because she's got a side man who's giving her lots of like coats and jewels and stuff. Turns out that new man on the side, his name is Bob. He manages Prince, and this song actually created one of the most recognizable lines of a Prince song, which is calling Prince that skinny motherfucker with the high voice. So basically, in the skit, in the song, I guess, he ends up killing his girlfriend and having a shootout with the cops, and then the song ends. That's the song. He actually ended up performing this during the Lovesexy tour, so he did this song on stage. So it definitely wasn't a lost track, and I think it gave them kind of a chance to have some fun acting on stage, and honestly, it's funny. It's really, really funny, but it's not necessarily my favorite skit, but it's funny.
Superfunkycalifragisexy. Gonna be sensitive to the touch, the first person that touch you.
So, Superfunkycalifragisexy, if you couldn't tell, is a play off of Mary Poppins and her Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious song from the movie. That was actually one of my very favorite movies as a child. If you listen to the lyrics, it sounds like Prince is actually singing about essentially taking drugs at a club and not being able to control yourself, and when you find somebody you want to get with. And basically it's a big arousal, like, kind of song. And it almost sounds like he's making fun of the people who do this type of thing and not necessarily, celebrating it or anything, but it sounds like he's making fun of people who take drugs, basically. The squirrel meat line, that one always kind of confused me. I think it could even be a fact that, like, you're so high you'll even eat squirrel meat. Like, it's kind of that weird kind of thought there. But honestly, I dig the song itself. I think the beat is awesome. I think that the funk of it is really great, and it's probably my favorite song on the album, except for the last track.
Two Nigs united for West Compton.
So Two Nigs United for West Compton is mostly an instrumental track. It starts off with kind of a party scene that sounds kind of unsavory, with some of the Lovesexy people, and they're like playing skits and talking to each other and whatever. But then it kind of launches into a really like awesome high energy instrumental track. I think it feels a lot like something that maybe they did for Madhouse that they decided to keep for themselves for Prince's album instead of for Madhouse. Since this one was also one of those that was recorded in 1986, which was around that time. But I've never actually ever understood what the title of the song is. No amount of research has given me any kind of insight into what Two Nigs United for West Compton is. Unless that was just kind of a dig at like NWA and those types of rappers and whatnot, and how they're always calling themselves niggas and stuff like that because they were from Compton. So it could just be something like they just wanted to name it that just to kind of throw you off and then launch into a really awesome instrumental, which is not anything that rappers can do. It could have just been another slight at rappers. So otherwise, if that's wrong, if you know, let me know in the comments, but otherwise, I'm just going to enjoy it as an awesome instrumental track.
Soaked in banana cologne, no wonder you're all alone. It's written all over your face, just a rock hard in a funky place.
then we get to the final track, and you guys know how I feel about final tracks. This one definitely lives up to the hype. It's got great horns, which are borrowed for the Sign of the Time movie. During I Could Never Take the Place of Your Man, they actually play the horns in this song. It's got great vocals. They're kind of like slightly higher pitched, almost Camille, but not really. And they're really funny. It's a very funny song. It's about a young man who goes to a brothel because he's got a perpetual hard-on, and as soon as he's actually faced with actual sex with a prostitute, he loses it and can't perform. I mean, that's pretty funny. But then, of course, just as he gives up and he's gonna leave, it comes back, and then he's like, yay, finally able to have sex. So, I mean, nothing tells me that there's any kind of underlying meaning to the song or anything. It seems pretty straightforward. It is kind of what it is. Prince even then, like, does a fade out and then back in with what kind of fuck ending was that? Like, that's what he says at the end. It makes me giggle every time. And then, of course, I have to answer him. It was a great ending, Prince. A great ending. So the Black Album is kind of a mixed bag for me because it's not a bad album, not by a long shot. It's funky, it was topical, it had some really good grooves in it. At the same time, again, it seems like so much the antithesis of what I got into Prince for, that it's hard for me to listen to it a lot just because it's just got such a different vibe. So it's good, but then it's also kind of bad for me, so it's weird. I mean, it's so bad that Prince was like, no, I want this removed off of the market, and I want to replace it with the masterpiece that is Lovesexy. Obviously, you all know how I feel about Lovesexy. And that was before I ever even knew that the Black Album was a thing. Even if you watch his Alphabet Street video, there's a secret in the video that says, do not buy the Black Album in the video. That should tell you how much he really did not want this album out, and why, even in 1994, that should tell you how desperate he was to get out of his contract, was because he actually ended up releasing this album. I think with all the mixed emotions and stuff, I think that it really makes it hard for me to rate this album at all. I guess, like, it's really good, and yet it's not very... It's weird. I probably would put this like middle of the road, so probably 3 stars, but since it is actually so good, I'm gonna bump it up to 3.5 stars, so it's gonna be kind of a middle lane-ish kind of album. But what do you guys think about the Black Album? What was your favorite track? Let me know down in the comments, and I would love to discuss this album with you guys now that I finally have the review out for it. Don't forget to hit us up on social media and check out the Patreon and all that stuff, and until next time, may you live to see the dawn. Congratulations, you made it to the end of the video. To reward yourself, why don't you hit the subscribe button? Make sure to hit that little bell for notifications later on when we come out with awesome new videos. Have a good one.